Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. So we're holding here in a very fascinating part of the Gemara. You could say part one of the miracle of Purim is coming to its pinnacle, its zenith. So let's read maybe a few psukim, a few verses inside of the Megillah. Last thing we said was, Yomer Melech Achashverosh, King Achashverosh said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who dared to do such a thing? And we explained that Achashverosh was shocked, and Esther was telling him, yeah, you should know there are two people. But Tomer Esther said, Ish Tsar v'Oyev, we have an enemy, an adversary, someone who persecutes us, and that is you, the king. In addition, Haman hara hazeh, this evil Haman wants to kill the Jews. The Haman niv'as, and Haman became terrified, v'pnei hamelech v'hamalka, in front of the king and the queen. Every bully, as soon as they're confronted with reality, they become very, very scared. So Haman suddenly became very scared. V'hamelech and the king stood up in great anger, great fury, from the wine feast, El Ginas Habisan, to the orchard and to the garden. And he stood for a walk. You ever saw anybody go for a breather, a cigarette break, a walk? And so, the king got up and he stood to go for a breather, to go outside and to go to the orchard. The Haman Amad, and Haman stood up, Levakesh al nafshay me Esther Malka, to beg for his life in front of Queen Esther. Ki ra'a, for he saw, Ki chalsa elav hara'a me'ez hamelech, that the king was very angry at him, and the king was deciding what type of evil thing he'll do to Haman, meaning the king is very angry at Haman. If you remember, we brought the pshat from Yenis and Eibshitz that Esther was telling Achashverosh, don't think that Haman's just going to be content with killing me. It was a famous line by, I forgot who it was. It says, by the Germans, at first they came for the Jews, and it wasn't Jewish. Then they came for the tradesmen, and it wasn't a tradesman. And then they came for someone else, and I was quiet. And finally, they came for me, and there was no one to stick up for me. Right? So, in a similar sense, hey, Baruch, Shalom Aleichem, welcome.
Aleichem Shalom.
In a similar sense, Esther is telling the king Achashverosh, don't think that Haman is going to be content just with killing the queen. He already killed one queen, Vashti. Now he wants to kill your second queen. He wants to put his daughter in as queen. Well, his daughter is dead now, but he wants to put his daughter. And he's out to get the throne, nothing less than your chair, than your throne. And the king is very angry. He goes out to the orchard. Haman seizes his chance. Haman stood up. Levakesh al nafshay me Esther Malka, to beg for his life from Queen Esther. He saw that the king was very angry and was ready to be very cruel and punishing to Haman. V'amelech shav neginas abisan, and the king returned from the orchard and the garden. We'll see soon where all of those were. El Beis Mishtei Hayayin, to the house of the wine feast. And suddenly he sees a sight in front of his eyes. Haman Neufel, Haman was falling down, Alamita Sher Esther Aleh, on the couch where Esther was laying on. So it seemed to him that Haman was actually attacking Esther in the house. Haman was not taking any time. Who knows if we'll have another chance. And he's trying to attack Esther in the house already. In the Gemara, it says that a malach, an angel, actually pushed Haman down on the bed. Because it says Haman was standing to beg for his life from Queen Esther. And here it says Haman Neufel. Haman is falling. Vayomer HaMelech, and the king said, Hagam lichbosh esam malka imi bad bayis. Are you even trying to force yourself on the queen while I'm in the house? Can you imagine such a chutzpah? The king's in the house and the prime minister is trying to force himself on the queen. Hadavar yatzav mipi hamelech ufnei hamanchafu. Yossi shalom aleichem. Reb Leibel shalom aleichem.
Shalom aleichem, Rabbi.
Lechem shalom. He says the words came out from the king's mouth and Haman's face fell into the ground. Now, what should you do with Haman? And this is where Charvaina comes in. And we'll discuss in the Gemara who Charvaina was. Was he a good guy or a bad guy? We mentioned him for good in Shoshanas Yaakov. We'll see soon in the Gemara who this Charvaina was. But he is interestingly one of the original advisors to the king from 12 years ago. He's still around, Charvaina. Charvaina, one of the chamberlains before the king, says to the king, Gam behold, you have in front of you the tree, the gallows, Haman that Haman made, Mordechai for Mordechai. Asher diber toiv ala melech. Mordechai is one of the people, he's the one who spoke good for the king. The whole day, today, Haman was parading him around saying, thus shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. And somehow, Charvaina is very familiar with all the details. He was standing in the house of Haman, it's 50 amos tall. You ever see the boy? No, did he take anything from the cookie jar? No. How would someone have taken it? Oh, he must have taken a chair and climbed up and he got his brother to help him, but it wasn't me. If you know too many details, that means you're quite involved in the plot. So this Charvaina, he knows that Haman made a gallows for Mordechai. It's 50 amos tall. And the king said, hang Haman on there. By Yislu is Haman, and they hanged Haman ala eitz asher eichen Mordechai on the gallows he had prepared for Mordechai. V'chamas hamelech shachacha, and the king's anger abated. And we'll see what that means in the Gemara. Chamas in Hebrew also means mother-in-law.
Appropriately.
Very appropriately.
And since we're all men, we can make mother-in-law jokes.
Exactly. Well, it says in one place in the Megillah, it says Chamasai Ba'aravai. The king's anger burned in him. It says Chamasai's mother-in-law, her name was Ba'ara. And it says over here, Chamasa Melech, the mother-in-law of the king, was Shachacha. What was her name? Shachacha or Ba'ara? Good question. So now the Gemara will go through explaining this part by part. If you remember what Esther's telling the king, Esther's trying to, what's her point? She's trying to get the king to do everything she could in her power to get the king to remove a decree against the Jews. So let's follow a logical train of thought, if any of us are capable of that. Let's follow, what?
I had coffee, so I could do it.
You had coffee. Baruch Hashem. Might have to grab a second coffee. If you remember what the Gemara we learned before, Haman was coming with all of his slander to the king. He's telling him like this: these people are disrespectful to the king. Their religion is different. He says they eat and drink and they insult the king. If a fly falls into their cup, they're going to pour away the fly and drink the rest of the cup of wine. But if the king touches the wine of the Jew, they're going to pour away the entire cup. They're not going to touch it. That means you're disrespectful to the king. Right. So Esther is trying to beg for her people to the king. What does she say? Does she try disproving all of Haman's claims one by one? All she says is, "King, please save us. We're being killed. if only we would have been sold as slaves, it would have been worth it. I wouldn't have complained. So Esther should at least try taking apart all of the claims of Haman. Why is she trying to save the Jews by saying something which Haman didn't even talk about at all?
I was wondering about that one.
Did she have known any of your claims?
We're assuming so, because Esther wrote it down in the Megillah later on, right? So we're assuming, at some point.
They've been in the Chronicles of the Kings.
The answer is because Haman was right. What Haman was saying was all accurate. That we're one nation, we're spread out, we have different religion. All of them are true facts. The only thing that Esther was arguing against,
All facts are true.
all facts are true. The only thing that Esther was arguing against was the very last words of Haman. It's not worth it for the king to keep them around. So what Esther is saying, even if everything that Haman is saying is true, but still, you're not going to have any benefit by killing them. Haman is saying there's no benefit from keeping them around. I'm telling you, there's no benefit from killing them. The only benefit you'll have is if you keep them alive, making them into slaves. He tells the king, Esther's telling the king, when you were looking for a queen and you gathered from the entire kingdom all the maidens and all the girls, and I'm the only one that you found favor in your eyes. You should know that I'm coming from that nation which Haman is speaking so badly against. Everything he said about us is true. And if you're going to touch our cup of wine, we'll have to kasher the cup of wine. And we'll throw out the wine and kasher the cup. But you see, even with all that, I still found favor in your eyes. You can learn about the entire Jewish people. They're all good people. And therefore, you said, what Haman said, it's not worth the king's good. It's not good. It's not for the king's good to keep them around. Here it is for the king's good to keep you around. I'm the only one who found favor in your eyes from all the nations of the world. Achashverosh, he might have had suspicions about Esther in the past. He saw Esther had 7 maidservants, and she used a different one every single day of the week. But now that he finds out that Achashverosh is Jewish, she realizes that everything Esther did in the past, which found favor in the king's eyes, everything she did was because she was Jewish. She grew up in a Jewish house, in a Jewish culture. So therefore, there's no need for Esther to start trying to use to logically take away all of Haman's reasons. All she had to say was, "This is my nation," and automatically Achashverosh knew everything else that Haman said, albeit it's true, but the conclusion is false. The conclusion, you have to kill the Jewish people, that was false. Says the Gemara. V'hamelech kam b'chamasa mimishte hayayin. It says, and the king stood up from his anger to the meal of the wine, and he went to the gardens in order to calm down. Now, later on, the Megillah says that the king returned from the gardens. Why does the Megillah have to say twice? The king stood up. Verse 7, the king arose in his fury and went to the orchard garden. And then it says, in verse 8, the king returned from the orchard garden. Just say he returned. He probably returned from where he came from.
Yeah.
So why does it say twice that he came from the orchard garden? And
There's a note here.
what does he say?
He lived in anger and he came back in anger.
Very good. Says the Gemara. So first of all, if you want to see where Achashverosh was going,
But he saw in the garden because the garden was the.
here's a picture This is the other palace of Achashverosh, which was very similar to Achashverosh's palace. This is how gardens were laid out back then. You see the big palace over here. And the royal gardens, till today, if you go to Iraq and Iran, gardens are still laid out in the same way all over the country. You have 4 large gardens over here. Each one is a different type of...
Rabbi, you can't see the...
Can't see it?
No.
Oh, no,
Now you can see it?
no. Oh, great out.
Here?
Yes, now we can see it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for pointing out. The Persian gardens are mentioned a lot in the old writings. There aren't a lot of clues near Shushan where the gardens actually were, but we can know that they're next to the woman's, next to Esther's palace. We don't know exactly where Esther's palace, where Esther's feast took place. But you see in the bottom of the page over here, you have irrigation channels, like little channels of water that they use to water the gardens. And in Mesechta Eruvin, Daf Chav Daled, it talks about Persian gardens and the different Persian kings and their palaces. So it talks about that there were thousands and thousands of fruit trees in a straight row. And as a matter of fact, there's a word in Hebrew today, which is actually a Persian word called pardes.
Ah, yes.
Pardes means an orchard.
It's also like heavily part this.
Pardes also stands for the 4 parts of Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soid. The simple meaning, the secret hints, the explanations, like the deeper explanations, and the Kabbalah, the secrets of the Torah. That comes from the word Pardes. So the word Pardes is actually a Persian word, and it made its way into Hebrew. It's used in Nehemiah. It uses the word Pardes. And in English, you have the word paradise.
Yeah.
It comes from the same Persian word, Pardes. Which paradise also, people envision it with a lot of trees, and it's all, it's a beautiful place. But it's quite amazing to think about it, because the area where it is a pretty dry desert. To have a beautiful orchard with thousands of trees, you have to have a lot of effort and labor go into this. If you look over here, there's a layout of the palace. I don't know if you could see it over here. Here's a palace. Okay, so the gardens were next to it. Anyways, the gardens were next to Achashverosh. Here it is. Here's this picture I was looking for. So you see, this is Achashverosh's palace, right? That's where the party was. That's the outer courtyard where Haman came. That's the inner courtyard where Esther came. That's a king's throne room. It's a woman's palaces. That's a gate where Mordechai was. That's a gate where Mordechai was waiting. So the king's palace, or the king's gardens, were assumingly was by number 13, which would be over here, this whole area over here. And if we learned previously, while we're talking about the king's party, Achashverosh's party, we said that there was no room in this big palace, in this big courtyard where the party took place, and they had to expand to the gardens, and from there they had to expand into the palaces. So you see, it makes sense that the gardens were right next to where this big room with all these columns where the big party took place. So we could assume somewhere from there that Esther's
What are the lines? The
topography, yeah. What's interesting is the whole area of the palace was originally 3 different hills, and then King Koresh came and he got tons of slave labor, and he filled in all the areas between the hills, and he made it one large plain, one large area.
Was it only the female wives and others? I can understand actually why the king actually would not want to be having actually the wives actually just simply leave in the harem and should go see him. Become like you have to make sure actually the wives are gonna be faithful, so maybe actually it's like, once you keep them under wraps.
Right? That's
But-
over here at number 8.
But is it actually, I don't remember actually what the Megillah says, is it that actually nobody can, they should come in, or was it just actually? Actually, the wives actually were not able to come in unless the king extends the scepter.
Where, to him or to the wives, to the women?
Uh,
No one was allowed into the women's quarters.
Oh, yeah, but I'm saying, for example,
And no, he would have to call them individually.
but I'm saying that is only the women or the men too.
Both.
I see. I wasn't
Both,
sure.
right. Yeah, both had to have a royal invitation to come.
I see, 'cause as
But
far as
even
the-
a woman who you think would, the king is, being intimate with her, even her had to have an invitation.
But I think actually, I'm sure that may have been actually that the king wanted to make sure that the wives were gonna be faithful,
How tall were they? 1 story, 2 story?
Which ones?
The palace.
The palace? So it depends, which place. Let's go back to the picture. This area over here, number 2, it was 2 stories tall, and each story was about 70 feet tall. That's about 140 feet tall over here. They have some of the original pillars, how you can see how tall they are. The area of the royal gate, they know from the other palace how tall it was. And the royal gate, I think, was 100 feet tall or something. How big Achashverosh's palace is over here, I think we're not sure. You could just make educated guesses. Yeah, but on paper it looks different. There's many different imaginings of how it actually looked. So the king gets up, goes from the woman's quarters, from Esther's palace, and walks into the gardens to have a break. But trying to have a break ends up being, he gets even more angry. How is that? Says the Gemara, Makish Shiva Lakima. It compares his returning to Esther's home, Esther's party, to just, it was the same as when he left Esther's party. Ma kima bechema, just like when he left the party to walk in the garden, he was very angry. Af shiva bechema. So too, when he returned to the garden, he was even more angry than when he left. Why? What made him angry? The Azal, the Ashkach, Lemalache Hasharis. He went into the garden and he saw angels, the Idmule Kigavri, which appeared like people, Ka'okri Lilane de Bustani, and they were chopping down, they were uprooting trees from Achashverosh's garden, from his orchard. Amar Lu, and he told them, Mayov Daichel, what are you doing here? Who sent you here? Amar Le, they told him, Tepakdinan Haman. Haman commanded us to uproot all these trees, which makes sense. Where is he going to find such nice, big, tall trees? He made 1 gallows for Mordechai, and Haman needs lots of gallows now because he's planning on making a big purge. So he told us to uproot all the trees from the king's garden. And the king's thinking, hey, it means he's not scared of me anymore. Is he trying to revolt against me? Asa levese, the king walked back into the house, and here he sees the Haman Neufel Alamita. And Haman is falling upon the bed where Esther is lying upon. The Gemara says, Neufel? Nafal mi ba'ili. Just the juxtaposition of the word should be better. Neufel means falling. Nafal means fell. Should have used the word, and Haman fell down. Not Haman was falling down. Right, but the word is used, Neufel, which means falling. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Lazar says, Melamed Sheba Malach v'piloi aleha, that an angel came and pushed Haman down on the bed. And every time Haman would try to stand up, the angel would push Haman down. So therefore it says Neufel, he was falling, he was constantly falling over and over.
I mean, he had luck, the only thing is it was bad luck.
Exactly.
The angels were busy that day in the garden.
Exactly. Omar Chashreir says, Vai mi beisa, vai mi bara. Woe is to me from in my house. In my house, Haman is attacking the queen. Woe is to me outside of my house, in the garden. And it says, Amar, and this is what the king says, are you trying to force the queen before me inside of my very house? Hagam, which sounds like, Hagam means also, meaning this is a second thing that I'm upset about. You're trying to also force a queen in my house, besides for what? Besides for also in the garden. He's angry at what happened in the garden. Now, Hashem, for sure, says, Lo yikain divrei shaker. Doiver shkodim lo yikain neged einai. Hashem does not allow any falsehood in front of his eyes. Correct? Tehillim. Pasuk Zion over here. Lo yeshev b'kerabesi, he will not dwell within my house. Oisirimiya, he who practices deceit. Hashem will not dwell with those who speak falsehood. So Hashem for sure will not speak falsehood. Haman never commanded anyone to uproot the trees. So why is Hashem sending angels, malachim, to say that Haman commanded him to uproot the trees if that never happened? So the answer given by Reb Eliezer of Germaiza, one of the times from the Germaiza, Germany, from the times of the Baal Tosfos, and he says it was mida keneged mida, measure for measure. The way that Haman acted is the way that it was meted out to him. Haman lied about the Jews to Achashverosh, so therefore, when he was killed, also was through something which was also a lie, that Haman commanded him to cut down the trees in the garden. Like we see, Hashem uses falsehood for those who are false. We see with false prophets of idols, of Avodah Zarah, Hashem put a false spirit in them, a spirit that they're saying not true things. The Chidah has another answer, which is more, you could say, more simple level, more understandable answer. That Haman actually did want to cut down the trees because he wanted to cut down the Jewish people, which are compared to trees. Tzaddik, a tamar yifrach, a tzaddik is compared to a tamar, a palm tree. Ka'erez valvanin, like a Lebanon cedar.
I was also thinking of another thing. They were disguised as men, so it could be actually that you can tell me if I may be onto something, or from Leon. Could be actually that if an angel is manifesting itself as itself,
Yeah.
then it always has to tell the truth. But if an angel manifests itself as a man, all of a sudden it's like now you're able to do the customs of men. Custom of men is to lie. So they're able then to lie for a good cause.
Right. Perhaps. I think you're onto something. And so Haman wanted to uproot the Jewish people, so therefore the trees in the garden were being uprooted as well on Haman's commands. And this says also when Haman was falling on Esther's bed, every time he tried to get up, an angel was pushing Haman down back onto the bed. It looks also like a falsehood because Haman didn't actually fall on Esther's bed. He was pushed down. So he answers the Chidah, Chaim Yosef David Azulay. And Haman, before he was showing off to all of his friends and relatives how great I am, he says, even the queen has a soft spot for me. If I ask her to submit to me, and she'll submit to me. So he was showing off about that. So Hashem said, okay, evil person, that's what you're thinking of. I'm going to connect it to a ma'aseh, connect it to an action. See what the results of that action are. So Hashem considered it as if he did it, and he pushed Haman onto Esther's bed. And that's what happened, and therefore, when King saw it, and he became angry.
But Haman was posting to other people then.
Yeah.
Oh, actually,
So it wasn't really false because that's what Haman really wanted.
Actually, that could actually be called crazy. I mean,
Mhm.
if you were going up to the king's queen,
Let's do the next two pieces of Gemara. Vayomer Charvaina said, one of the king's chamberlains. If you remember Charvaina, we had him earlier. Right, he was in chapter 1. One of the king's advisors. So Charvaina was the one who told the king that Haman made a gallows in his courtyard in order to hang Mordechai. So Charvaina said to the king, here is a gallows which Haman has built 50 amos tall to hang Mordechai, who has done good for the king. So the fact that he knew how tall the tree is and who it was made for shows that he was actually one of Haman's henchmen. He was with Haman. Remember, it says Haman spoke to his advisors. In the beginning, he spoke to his friends. Later on, they became his advisors when they saw that things weren't going so good for him. It means Charvaina was part of that clan, who was a friend of Haman and now became an advisor of Haman. And when he sees the tables being turned, the king is angry at Haman. Now suddenly he's an opportunist, and now he wants to get himself in the good graces of the king. He has no problem throwing Haman under the bus, telling the king, look, here's a gallows which Haman built. And you could see it from the king's garden, from the king's palace. You could see the gallows. So we've seen the picture, right? You can see Daniel's tomb, which was not as tall as Haman's gallows. And you could see it straight from the area of the king's palace. And Haman lived in that area where Daniel's tomb is. Amar Rabbi Lazar, says Rabbi Lazar, Af Charvaina harasha ba'isa etza. Even Charvaina was an evil person, a wicked person, and he was part of the plot of Haman to kill Mordechai. And he also wanted to see Mordechai killed. V'kivin shira'a shalei niskaima atzasai. Once Charvaina saw that his plot will not succeed, and Haman is now going to be having his downfall, miyad barach, immediately he escaped. He switched allegiances right away. And this is what it's written. It says, talking about Eov. Eov says that an evil person, a Rasha, whenever Hashem punishes him, he has no one to back him up, no one to support him, because all of his friends are all fair weather friends. As soon as things are going bad for the Rasha, they're all going to escape and run away from him, because they don't want to be involved in any of the punishments that the Rasha gets. So the Rasha doesn't have any friends. A tzaddik has friends in good times and bad times. A Rasha only has friends in good times because they see what they could benefit out of him. But if anything changes, then suddenly they're all going to lose support. It was I'm going to call him a Rasha, just an interesting thing. Remember, we had a teacher saying there was someone who ran for president in 92. His name was Ross Perot, right? And he was leading the polls at one point because he was a billionaire and he supported his own campaign. Then at one point, he asked everybody to donate $10 to his campaign. And then all of his supporters left, right?
I remember Russ Perot. Vote for me.
Continue. So that's what Eov says, that the Rasha, evil person, has no friends. So from here, it seems like actually Charvaina was not a good person. Other places, we say in Shoshanas Yaakov, V'gam Charvaina zachar latov. Charvaina should be remembered for the good, because at the end of the day, he's the one who caused Haman to be hung. There's midrashim which say that Charvaina actually was Eliyahu Navi, meaning not the actual Charvaina, but Eliyahu Navi took the form of Charvaina. Charvaina wasn't actually there. Eliyahu Navi took his form and told the king to hang Haman on the gallows. But there's an old Yiddish saying, like a Charvaina in shtetl. A charvaina and shtetl is an expression saying that the one who's just the opportunist, just to see what he could get out, what he could gain from everybody. So he's never really your friend. When that comes over to you and tries being your friend, so they would say he's a charvaina and shtetl, meaning he's a fair weather friend. That's like an old Yiddish expression, charvaina and shtetl.
Like people in English say, the United States says you're a Benedict Arnold, right?
You're a Benedict Arnold, right?
Yeah.
He's a charvaina and shtetl. Let's do the last piece over here in the Gemara. It says, "V'chamas hamelech shachacha," and the king's anger was assuaged. It says shachacha. It doesn't say shacha. It says shachacha, which sounds like with two chafs instead of one chaf. We had the word kishoich hamelech achashverosh. Remember, we had that the king calmed down was one chaf, or vayeshoiku hamayim. We have by Kriyas Yamsuf, and the water calmed down. Here is shachacha with two chafs, meaning that it was a double calming down. How did he calm down twice? To teach you that there was two angers of the king, and from both of these angers, the king calmed down. Or there were two different angers of two different kings. So the Gemara will say, Achas shel malkai shel olam. There was one anger which was assuaged, and this is the anger of Hashem, which Hashem forgave the Jews for bowing down to the idol during the times of Nebuchadnezzar. V'yachas shel Achashverosh, and there was another anger which was also calmed down, which is anger of Achashverosh, who wanted to destroy them, kill the Jews, and that anger calmed down as well. V'amrila, and some say, Achas shel Esther, v'achas shel Vashti. The king himself was the one who calmed down in double way. One is that he was angry at Haman, and therefore once he had the king calmed down. And also, from when he killed Vashti, the king was always angry at Haman. Why did you give me advice to kill Vashti? So therefore, the king calmed down from that anger as well. I know of a certain shliach who he knew of a young man, which unfortunately he met a non-Jewish woman and he wanted to marry her, and they're going out. And with very much effort, he managed to convince the young man to go to Eretz Yisrael, to go to Israel for a visit. It's before the days you could keep in touch on Facebook and Instagram and other social medias. And anyways, Baruch Hashem, the young man ended up leaving the non-Jewish woman, and he ended up marrying a nice Jewish girl. And he lived in the same city as a shliach, but even though the shliach prevented him from marrying a non-Jewish girl, he's still very angry at him. He sees him, he crosses the street, and he says, "You took away my real love, my one real love that I had, and you took it away from me." He's thankful on the one hand. He understands he should be thankful that Baruch Hashem, that shliach helped prevent him from marrying a non-Jew. On the other hand, he's very angry. Emotionally, he can never get over it as well. Right? And he said, "You took away my one real love that I had." In a similar sense, Achashverosh, he might have understood that Haman was right, but he still always had an anger towards Haman for suggesting that Vashti should be killed.
And this one says actually, was one real love as opposed to his wife?
Maybe whatever that means, intense.
Oh wow! Oh, that's interesting.
Unfortunately. Right. Okay, we'll continue now with Mesechta Middos. Okay. So right over here, just to keep a track on the calendar right now, we're holding in the year 3408. Right, this is when Achashverosh is second feast, and soon in the Megillah we're going to skip a year. Just to go ahead.
Since you mean years since creation, it don't mean actually like BCE. You mean years of creation? You mean, right?
Correct. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. Because I mean, if it would be BCE, it would be actually before the time of Abraham, it would be more like Noah.
Okay. So I have a few different resources on the screen. Hopefully, today should go a little smoother. And we're learning Mesechta Middos. We're up to Perek chapter 2. And Mesechta Middos. We're discussing now the Hatzvi-Bais, Temple Mount. We said that when somebody walks into the Beis Hamikdash, then they had to always walk towards the right. The Temple Mount itself was a size of 500 amos by 500 amos. This whole area was 500 amos by 500 amos. And the Beis Hamikdash was not centered in the middle. From whatever direction you looked, that's how it would, that's what side, how much side place was in the Beis Hamikdash on the Temple Mount. On this side over here, this would be the southern side where you have the most empty space. So in that area, you had many different chambers and many different places built. You had 15 different offices for 15 different officers in the Beis Hamikdash. You had a small dwelling for the for the Kohen Gadol. You had a small Sanhedrin over here in this whole area of the Beis Hamikdash. This is called Aftinas, Beis Aftinas, second floor over here. And assumingly this was the home of the Kohen Gadol. He had two houses. This is one in the Beis Hamikdash called Beis Aftinas, one on the Hatzvi-Bais, and then there was a further one in the city of Yerushalayim where his wife would live. Continue with the next Mishnah. Lifnim mimenu soirig. So you had the Temple Mount, the entire Temple Mount. Let's zoom in a little bit to this picture. In Temple Mount, you have around the Beis Hamikdash itself many different layers upon layers. And it says there are 10 layers of holiness in the world. Eretz Yisrael is holy, and the rest of the world, walled cities are holier than the rest of Eretz Yisrael. Yerushalayim is holier than that. The Hatzvi-Bais, the Temple Mount, is the next level of holiness. The level above that is called the Soirig. The Soirig literally means a fence. There was a small wooden fence around the area of the Beis Hamikdash. It was a very short fence. It was about 10 tvachim, about 3.5 feet tall. So you could look right over it. And it was interwoven with many, made out of wood and lattice. And as a matter of fact, until this point of the Soirig, here it makes it out of stone, if you look at the Soirig. But it wasn't actually, it was wood, they say. And you see all these little boxes over there? Throughout the Soirig, along the entire Soirig, you had breaks in the fence. And you had these tablets. And they discovered several of them nowadays. They're written in Greek and Egyptian, two different languages, which says that the non-Jews are only allowed up to this point. Whoever passes this point will be put to death. Right? Meaning, from that point, non-Jews are only allowed up to the area of the Soirig.
I said it's going to be a house where all the people.
Correct. So all the people to bring karbanos, right? But to go, I mean, they're only allowed up to that point. They were allowed on the Hatzvi-Bais, but not past that. They have similar laws like that even today if you go to Mecca. Also, past the Soirig, anybody was a tummy mess, was impure from a dead body, you're not allowed to enter there also past that as well. So here is just a you see all these different openings. We're going to learn about these openings here in the Mishnah. But here you see the Seirig, this fence with all these tablets, right? And you hear many Jews on the way to the Karban Pesach, just a drying, bringing in their Karban Pesachs, and they're walking through all the openings of the Seirig, going toward the Beis HaMikdash. I'll zoom into this picture. Right over here, this picture here on the right. So here's a Seirig, and you have all the Jews walking through, bringing in the Karban Pesach. So let's read the Mishnah inside. Lifnei mimenu Seirig gevoya asara tvachim. So as you enter the Hatzvi-Bais, you had a Seirig, a small gate, which had signs in it that on stone tablets, that non-Jews and Jews who are tamei mes, but non-Jews should not enter, and if you enter, you're entering at your own risk. And it was made out of lattice work, made out of wood, sort of like a wicker.
When you said at your own risk, did they die?
Yeah. I mean, they would put to death anybody who would, when they had the power to do it. They would put to death anyone who walked in past that.
Not from the Shemayim.
No, right. They would put to death. I'm assuming later on there were times they didn't have the power to do it, because there is a Roman, several years before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, we have an account from a Roman soldier, Roman officer, an account of the Karban Pesach. And he describes what went on inside of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. So I'm assuming at some point it didn't anymore have the power to do it. But as long as they had the power, we'll see. The Greeks weren't too thrilled about this. Well, there were 13 breaches inside of the Seirig. Shepartzum Malchei Yavan. The Greek kings, when they conquered Eretz Yisrael, and they made 13 breaches in the Seirig, meaning the Greeks didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash. Unlike the Babylonians, unlike the Romans, they didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash. They wanted to make it into a beautiful Jewish museum. And they wanted to show how us Greeks are not encumbered by any of the limitations that you put on. These silly limitations. You said, you think a Beis HaMikdash is holy? So they went and they made 13 breaches, 13 breaks in the wall of the Azara, of the Seirig. Chazer u'gedarim. And later on, when the Jews won the Greeks miraculously, they closed all the breaches in the wall. V'gazru kenegdam shloish esrei shtachavayos. And they said at any time somebody walks by a place where there was a break in the wall, they should bow down 13 different places. And so that is the idea of the Seirig. It says it was a stone base, a wooden lattice work, and with 13 different breaches in the wall, and that's how people would enter the Beis HaMikdash. Now, after that, you have an area called the Chel. So the Chel is Ufnimi Menu Hachel Eser Amas. The Chel was a large courtyard, which was 10 Amas wide, and it surrounded the Azara on all sides. If you see this highlighted area, that white, if you see in this picture, these two pictures, you had that Seirig, the fence on the outside, and then you had a large 20-foot long platform, like a courtyard on all sides going around the entire Beis HaMikdash. That is called the Chel. And the reason why it's called a Chel is because it was an area which was between sort of echol, between the holy and the unholy. This was the border. So you see over here, you can say on the chel, here's a soirig. Right inside of the soirig, you have his courtyard with many steps on there. Now, the chel is something that the chachamim, the sages, added on. It wasn't originally in the Mishkan. It was something that they added on as an extra border between the holy and the more holy, between the Beis HaMikdash. Only Jews who were pure were allowed to go into the chel, although it was not actually in the Beis HaMikdash. The chel is also the place, it says, that on Pesach, if Pesach came out to be on Friday night, if Pesach came out to be on Shabbos, so everyone who shechted the korban Pesach couldn't roast it till the night, because you weren't allowed to cook on Shabbos if you're eating it on Motzei Shabbos. So what they would do is they would have three groups who would shech the korban Pesach. One group would shech their korban Pesach, wait inside of the Hatzvi-Bais, the Temple Mount, which was surrounded by walls. One group would wait in the chel, and the third group is waiting in the Azara, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Right, so this is, if you can see over here, many Jews have shechted the korban Pesach. Their Pesach sacrifice is Shabbos day. One group is waiting outside of the chel, outside of the fence of the soirig, holding their shechted animals on korban Pesach. One group is waiting in the chel, outside of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. And one group was still waiting in the Azara, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Ushtei meser mailas hayusham, and there were 12 steps inside of the chel. Ruma maila chatzi ama, v'shilcha chatzi ama. Each step was about 7 inches tall and 7 inches deep. Or about a foot tall and a foot deep. Kol mailas hayusham rum maila chatzi ama, v'shilcha chatzi ama chutz mishal ulam. In general, in the Beis HaMikdash, you had many, many steps. It was built on a mountain. Go through the entire Beis HaMikdash, you can have steps everywhere you go. In Azaras, all over you are going to have steps. In general, steps were a half an amma tall and half an amma in. So if amma is 2 feet, about a foot tall and a foot in.
Pretty steep.
You can say they're large steps, but if amma is a foot and a half, and each one is 7 inches, 7 inches.
Somebody quoted that picture there. It's steep.
Right. Again, these pictures are not 1,000% accurate.
No handrail.
No, it was unfortunately it was not wheelchair accessible. The Beis HaMikdash. Right. It was not handicapped. It's Mashiach times. Just when he's handicapped, will be able to start walking again. So we'll take care of that issue. Yeah, but it probably was not built up to modern code. You know, I'm sure they would have had I'm assuming so. But it says there were special doctors in the Beis HaMikdash for the Kohanim, doctors. Because Kohanim would be working outdoors, it would be very hot or very cold. They would be walking barefoot on the marble floors, so it was very cold, and they would be eating a lot of meat. There would be so many korbanos, like the meat they would eat wasn't fully cooked so well, because we have to process it very quickly, and they were eating a lot of it, so they would have many stomach aches, stomach maladies, and there were doctors in the Beis HaMikdash to treat the Kohanim.
Where do they skin it and clean them? The courtyard?
That was in the Ezra's Kohanim, in the area of the Kohanim of the Beis HaMikdash.
Excited to see it.
Mir Hashem, I'm saying we'll only get to see it in Mir Hashem by the Beis HaMikdash, but in this area of the Beis HaMikdash, next to the Mizbeach. Right now, if you're looking from the bird's eye view, we're talking about this area over here, this gray area. There were 12 steps over there, Each step was half an amma tall. So 6 ammas tall altogether, about 12 feet up in the air. Gavan esrim amma, v'rachban esrim ammas, chutz mishal ulam. In general, whenever there were doors and gates, and of those, there were many gates and many doors all over the Beis HaMikdash. So all the gates and doors, they were 10 amas wide and 20 amas tall. Means about 20 feet wide and 40 feet tall. That's how big the gates were in the Beis HaMikdash. Except for the ulam. The ulam is here's the gates. All right, so all these gates were 10 amas wide, 20 feet wide, and 40 feet tall, except for the entrance to here, to the actual Beis HaMikdash. Right, so let's try finding the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash. The actual ulam, this entrance over here these gates were much larger. These were 20 amas tall and 40 amas high, 40 feet wide and 80 feet tall. Right, those doors were very, very large. So all the doors were 20 feet wide and 40 feet tall, and these gates were 40 feet wide and 80 feet tall, coated in gold. Here, there was no door to go in. This large entrance over here, there's no door to enter where the mouse is. Every single gate had a lintel, something on top, except for the gates of Teddy. Remember that the Teddy gates we said are named after a certain person, and it was meant only for those who became tamei, impure during the day. They would leave the Beis HaMikdash and walk through a special exit through the gates of Teddy. So it's a very low profile type of gate to leave. So in order that it should be easily recognizable, right, somebody had to leave. They became tamei, impure, in the middle of the day, the seminal emission. So in order to leave the Teddy gate, so therefore, he would they had a special shape on the Teddy gate. It was sort of like a keystone on top of the gate. People should know that this is a gate to leave. All the gates in the Beis HaMikdash, all the gates were originally iron or wood, and later on, in the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, they were very poor. So they built the Beis HaMikdash, all the gates out of wood. When they became more wealthy, they covered all the gates with gold. The gates of Niknar, the Niknar gates, we've learned about them with the big miracle that happened with the Niknar gates. They were made out of copper, very tall, very large. And Niknar gates would be those gates over there. These tall gates would be the Niknar gates. And the reason why, and they were always kept, because for two reasons. First of all, a large miracle happened with them. We spoke about the miracle that they went, that they were thrown overboard on the way to Eretz Yisrael, and miraculously it continued all the way, floated to Eretz Yisrael, and they brought it to the Beis HaMikdash. And the other reason is because it says they were very, very bright. They were so beautiful that they were more, that they shone like gold. That's how bright they were. Last picture. So the woman's gate over here. These are the gates of Niknar on top of these steps. And these gates were made out of copper, but they were very beautiful and they shone very strongly. and because a great miracle happened with them. And they were made out of special copper that came from Egypt, that came from Mitzrayim. Okay, Shikoyach, thank you for joining.
Yeah.